On this beach, the water ran red with the blood of young Canadian soldiers, fighting for freedom, participating in the most pivotal day of the 20th century, determining the destiny of the world. D-Day has been called the most significant event of the 20th century. The world was at a crossroads. The Nazis controlled Europe. Their doctrine was racist. Their basis of power was hatred. Their manifest destiny to dominate the world was frighteningly real. Yet Hitler had them mired in a battle with Russia that depleted his power. To defeat him, the Allies needed to invade Western Europe and create a second front. The disaster at Dieppe taught the Allied planners several lessons that they would use in the planning of D-Day. They could not invade a fortified port, so landing beaches were sought. The beaches had to be able to support tanks and wide enough to allow several divisions to land within a very short period of time. The site also had to be close to England. That was necessary for an efficient supply route, as well as being within range for effective aerial support by fighter pilots. Most importantly, it had to be within striking distance of Germany's industrial heartland. One location met all of the criteria: the Calvados coast in Normandy. A massive training program commenced, as did Operation Fortitude, a cover plan designed to confuse Nazi intelligence. But Hitler was aware of the weakness along the Atlantic coast. He had the Atlantic Wall built in order to repel an invasion anywhere along the Western Front. 17.6 million cubic tons of concrete was poured, fortifying the coast with gun emplacements, pillboxes, and obstacles. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel oversaw the massive program and had the coastline covered with mines. Any landing would face fierce resistance. Operation Overlord called for the landing of American, British, and Canadian units on 5 codenamed beaches. The Canadian Air Force would play a key role. Bomber Command would destroy gun emplacements and strategic sites. Fighter Command would provide aerial cover and support. Canadian paratroopers would parachute into action for the very first time in their country's history, jumping behind the lines and aiding the British 6th Airborne in protecting the east flank. The Royal Canadian Navy would transport the infantry and armored units across the English Channel and land them on the beaches, as well as providing artillery support. The infantry and armored units would land on Juno Beach and charge the fortifications there. Their job was to break through the Atlantic Wall and take a foothold in Europe. And so it was on June the 6th, 1944, when Canada became one of 3 nations that would determine the course of history. It would be Canada's 24 hours of destiny.
D-Day, as you know, was the assault on Europe, or the opening of the Second Front.
We knew it was going to be a tough thing. To us, the Atlantic Wall, they kept saying Atlantic Wall, we had no idea what it looked like, and we sort of envisioned it to being pillboxes from one end of the France to the other, right through to Belgium.
You have to remember that we were young, irresponsible, slowly growing up, but not normal growing up is we joined the Army as kids. 4 years later, we're at the beach.
Well, we were all excited, of course. We knew it was coming, and we were anxious to take part in it.
And we wondered whether it could be successful. But we had been bombing the communications, railways, and other centers more intensely in about a month prior to the invasion.
We trained and trained and trained, and into the boats and out of the boats and things like that.
And I think that's what most people felt, that we'd had enough training. Let's get going on whatever task we had to do and get it done.
Because I guess a lot of people's minds, for the first time in 4 years or so, you could see hope of the thing ending and you getting back home.
Shall we say we were wound up? We were going to win the war all by ourselves. Didn't think anything could stop us.
As June the 6th started, Canadian bombers were pounding the coastal defenses. The Navy was crossing the channel, and the paratroopers were about to jump.
I noticed on the flight over from England, I looked down through the clouds, and halfway across the English Channel, there was so many boats from halfway across back to England that it seemed or appeared to me that you could almost jump from one ship to another and go back to the English coast. And it would give you a great feeling that everybody was working for the same purpose.
Of course, the Navy part of that was called, on June the 6th, was called Operation Neptune, while the broad code name was Overlord, Operation Overlord.
But that was the biggest armada that went across on D-Day that there has ever been.
We weren't told where we were going, or we didn't know until we got there. Or
we were following a channel that had been swept by the minesweeping flotilla.
And the waves were quite rough. But as you got further out in the channel, it got really rough.
I was told the seaman that I wasn't a very good sailor, and that's why I joined the Army. So they said, well, why don't you lie on the gunwale? I was on an LST, a landing craft tank. And why don't you lay on the gunwale and look for mines?
We were walling because these smaller boats, the landing craft, weren't that big, and they just went every which direction. Right to left, up and down. It was pretty hard to keep anything in on an even keel.
Well, everybody was sick.
Once a few started getting sick, everybody got sick, it seemed. In fact, we were issued with what they called vomit bags vomit, and I think we were 3, I think each we had. Well, most of us could have used at least 12.
It was windy and rough day. Started out anyways, and about halfway I got seasick, and pardon me, but I had a glass of rum that fixed me up.
Our platoon commander was Benny Dunkerman, and his batman was on our craft, and he had to run to the side and let it go over the side, puked, and he lost all his false teeth and everything there.
I think we were all awake. Nobody could sleep.
I think we were just wishing that we would land and get off of the damn boat to get away from the seasickness.
Bomber Command, whenever they could, would go out and soften up the German army that had previously been dug into a certain location and permitted our Canadian troops to proceed ahead. When you put the Lancasters and the Halifaxes together, carrying something like 10 and 12,000 pounds of bombs each, it's a total destruction of almost whatever they went after.
We went in to bomb the the heavy guns on the French shore. 2208 we took off in Lancaster KB 726A. Flying Officer DeBrain was the pilot. And our operation was against the coastal defense at I'm not French, but Crutences or something like that.
Death was all around us, you might say, especially when we were on the bombing run. There's a common theme that said 1 in 4, or maybe a quarter of all air crews would not come back.
And I didn't notice anything different than any other type of operation, because there's always shooting going on.
At some time or other, fear does hit you. There's no question.
We bombed the guns on the shore, on the beaches that night. Well, that was just another target.
We were all very happy. Okay, let's go. Let's support the fellows on the ground.
So it was a tremendous job of coordination and cooperation and so on.
Most of us went out about 12:10. We were a little earlier than anticipated. I think we were supposed to go in at 12:30, and the rest of the battalion was to be in at 1 o'clock, and it'd be continuous from then on. The whole division would be dropping in different fields.
I was a private with the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion, having dropped into Normandy at about 12:45, that's 1:45, on the morning of June the 6th.
In my case, as far as I can remember, we were deplaned about 12:50, 10 minutes to 1 in the morning.
I was in the medical section of the battalion, so I was in headquarters company, and I'm not quite sure, but I think we left around midnight, our particular plane.
My company and my situation where we went in these Albemarle bombers, and only 10 men could go in each aircraft. The first 120 in our company went over in the Albemarle bombers. All the rest came out of the Dakotas, the American C-47, which 20 men sticks, and they could go out the door, which was faster.
There wasn't very much talk, to be truthful. Everyone was apprehensive and nervous, of course, and there wasn't a lot of chatter going on, no.
This picture changed when we neared the coast, and we could see flashes of light through the porthole.
Once we reached the coastline, there was some MAC fire, and the aircraft did take evasive action. Possibly this accounts for why we were so wide scattered.
Some that went straight into the target, to the drop zone, at least they got onto the field. Others who got the evasive action, the pilots lost where they were supposed to be, and when they saw a field that they thought looked familiar, they just put on the green light and everybody go out.
None of us hit the actual drop zone.
But the aircraft, the pilot was weaving all over the place, and we were rolling around inside and cursing because he wasn't flying in a straight path. And anyway, the red light came on, and so the guys that were closest to the hole unhooked the door, raised them up and hooked them on the sides of the aircraft, so the hole was ready. After the first 4 men went out, and they went out, they were gone zip when the green light went on. I don't know whether it was the next man who was a Bren gunner or what, but somebody said the door is flopped, and he got jammed in half of the hole. They struggled, and finally he disappeared, and they hooked the door back up, and the rest of us went out. But what had happened at the time that elapsed, the last of us were dropped way the heck off where we were supposed to be. Nobody believes that one stick landed close to where the troops were going to come up on the beach later on. and one was at an airfield at Le Havre. That's almost 40 miles between.
In my case, it was just fields. That's all I seen were fields. There was no fire actually at all in the area where I was.
And then the Germans had flooded the area around the Dives River. Those who landed in the fields that were flooded, there was only 3 feet of water, they survived. Those who landed in a ditch, that would be 6, 7 feet deep with their loads, we lost a few men who happened to land in those ditches, in the water over those ditches. They just went straight down to the bottom and never got up again.
The area that I dropped into, it was only about 4.5 feet of water, so I survived.
I landed by myself, probably about 3 miles from the drop zone towards Caen.
When I was looking for the ground, I remember it was black as the ace of spades, and I couldn't see the ground at all. I went, it's got to be close here. I better get ready. But before just thinking that, I hit the ground. Caught me by surprise.
I got out of my parachute, left it there, and looked around, and I saw some trees off to the east a bit, and walked towards these trees because I figured that the trees would be on the edge of the road.
Well, first I tried to locate where the hell I was, and which was very difficult because it's just farmland, and there wasn't anything to go by.
I had no idea which direction to go, but I saw the aircraft, heard the aircraft still flying over. So I thought, well, they're coming from the coast, so I walked in that direction. That turned out to be the right decision.
In the early hours of D-Day, Canadian paratroopers faced confusion and tried to find their way to their targets.
Besides all our equipment, and when I say equipment, that is rifle and bullets and gammon bombs and grenades. Each one of us had a vest which held 12 sticks of PHE, plastic high explosive. You had to collect up enough of these chaps with their vest of plastic high explosives in order to demolish the bridge. And I got to the bridge about 10 after 1, quarter after 1, and we waited, and there was other lads come in with their load of PHE, and Captain Peter Griffin was there. That's our B Company second in command.
Actually, after about a half an hour, I heard some small arms fire, and I headed in that direction, figuring that we were the only ones in there, so it had to be some of our people who were involved in the firefight or whatever it was.
I actually was sitting beside the doctor because the medical section in headquarters company, which consisted of 4 of us. As we approached the drop zone, of course, there was an announcement to stand up. I happened to be number 19 in the plane. There was 20, and another part of our medical section was number 20. When I reached the door, they stopped me from going out because they had gone over the drop zone. So the 2 of us, 19 and 20, we sat down again, and of course, immediately we thought, well, this is a complete letdown. We're going to go back to England, but they didn't. He came around again, and the 2 of us went out. It turned out to be very fortunate for me because the first 18 landed were either captured or killed or missing or wounded. And of course, unfortunately, the medical section of our battalion was just decimated.
Midway across the English Channel, the flotilla of ships battled the heavy seas and harsh weather.
We were on route all night in the boats. Because it all had to be done in one line. If some unit was getting behind on the boats, they wouldn't be there to have a full lineup on the beach going in.
One of the key targets of the paratroopers was the Merville Battery. It had to be neutralized before the landing, or the large guns would wreak havoc on the beaches.
Out of the 600 men that are trained to do that, only 180 some odd men actually were put in the attack and carried it out successfully. When the Merville batteries were taken out and they had damaged the guns so they couldn't fire, then they were to move to a pre-planned defense line. A company was to follow those men from the 9th Battalion that were left. Now, there weren't a lot of men. There were only about 60, I think, left of the 180 some odd men.
I'm pleased, looking back, that I and my crew were part of the D-Day operation. We flew into the gun emplacement north of Juno Beach at Houlgate. It
was really a confusing situation. I don't think they ever imagined that by dropping at night that they would have so much confusion.
I went for, possibly an hour. I met up with two British airborne troops, and they were pushing a 6-pound anti-tank gun. They had landed in a glider that was totally wrecked. The Jeep was totally wrecked, but they managed to get the gun out. And the two of them were hand pushing this thing by themselves, so I gave them a hand.
It's kind of a vague, because you just sort of walk, you hear noises, and you go to ground, and nothing, and then you get up and go again. And
I saw these shadowy figures in the distance, but I avoided them, whether they were our people or the Germans. It was still quite dark at night.
We heard then from the guys who had actually carried out all the objectives that we had to do, blowing the bridge, taking out the German strong point, making sure there was no Germans around the drop zone for the rest of the troops to come in. All those jobs were carried out by 35 men that landed on the field and headed to the rendezvous. They knocked out the machine gunners, and the snipers actually must have hit the officer in charge of the bunker, because it was around noontime when the Germans came and sent out a guy with a white flag. About 40 men in the bunker came up with their hands up. And they were quite peeved when they realized there was only about 20 Canadians around them. That must have been funny.
By about 3 o'clock, there was 18 of us there, and Captain Griffin says, "Does anybody know anything about how to blow this stuff up?" Because we were supposed to have a Royal Engineer to do the blowing job. I said to Captain Griffin, "I know a little bit about explosives." Well, he says, "You better get at it then." So it was just a case, there was 2 I-beams onto the bridge. It was a case of somebody standing on my ankles so that I didn't fall into the River Deves and reach underneath and put the plastic high explosives, it's like plasticine, and put it on the bridge. Told everybody to clear off, and at 3:20 a.m. I blew it. It wasn't completely blown, but nobody could drive a tank or a car or a Jeep or anything else over it because it was dipping in the water.
At sea, the men contemplated what was ahead of them on what could be their last night on Earth.
And of course, we all got letters off home, to let the family know that we were in good shape, and we couldn't say anything about D-Day or anything, but I think the general public had a pretty good idea that it was coming soon. we'd been all equipped at the camp beforehand with our battle dress that had been gas impregnated, so anti-gas in case the Germans used gas. And it smelt terrible, and the battle dress was very hot because it filled up a lot of the weave in the battle dress.
They gave us bacon and eggs for breakfast. And I said to the guy, my men, I said, so the condemned man ate a hearty breakfast.
A few of them tried to eat, but most weren't successful in that. 3 of the companies were carrying the airborne bikes, and one company was to be carried on the carriers, which is D company, the company I was with. One of the reasons for that was the fact that they could only load so many bikes onto these landing craft with all the crew.
We could see the outline of the flotilla. And that's all you could see, ships all over the place, literally hundreds. Big ships, small ones, large landing craft, landing ship tanks.
The view was also spectacular from the air.
And suddenly over the intercom came the word, my God, they've got a whole brand new island down there. And this was all the ships that were going across.
I eventually hooked up with some people from C Company who had been there much earlier. We just eventually found our way by getting out onto a road and finding some road signs, and then moving towards our rendezvous place, which was actually in a place called Le Mesnil.
While many Canadians were making their way to Normandy, members of Bomber Command were just returning.
Well, the adrenaline's flowing by then when you get out of the aircraft. When you open that door and get down on solid ground again, and you start to look at the list of the aircraft reporting in, well, most of us would go and hang around there looking to see, oh, Joe got in, so-and-so's back, so-and-so's back, and we'd have bacon and eggs and whatnot. Well, the mechanics would work on the list of deficiencies or things wrong with the aircraft from the night before.
We got up at 3 in the morning to be briefed by the intelligence people and by our wing commander. So we had 3 roles, but on D-Day, our role, the role I took part in, was to do a low-level visual reconnaissance of the city called Caen, and then to come back over the beaches and do a patrol and reconnaissance and a defensive action, if necessary, over the beach.
And you're going in against a lot of gunnery, flak, searchlights, and all. The searchlights caused a bit of trepidation, shall we say. We bombed at 03:54, so we bombed at about 4 o'clock in the morning. We bombed gun emplacements, and we were not told of Juno Beach. So what we got is a message saying, do a good job, fellas. Okay, we got out of there. We, quite often, we were given a route to fly to get off the target, and then we had a route to fly home.
We had Sterling bombers that were flying back and forth over the English Channel, and they were dropping tinsel, which would be called a nickel raid. They'd be dropping tinsel down so that the enemy, when they were reading on their radar screen, they would just be blipped out. They would think that there were thousands and thousands of aircraft there, where actually there wasn't any.
At first light then, which was early in the morning, some of us were allowed up deck. There were the gathering of the storm, as it were, of all the various types of boats and so on that were going over, and they were arranging them in their order and flotillas and so on.
It started to get daylight around 4 o'clock, a little bit of light, so you could actually make out movement down the field. I clearly remember 2 gliders, one one coming in for a landing, another one, he was starting to straighten out about 100 feet up, and another one came over and the two collided. Jesus, there were guys coming tumbling out of the air, and most of them were killed landing on the ground. And what a hell of a sight that was. From there we knew in the general direction where we were supposed to be, where our battalion was supposed to be.
So we're out in the open sea. And it was pretty rough at that time because the we was open. We were in a landing craft tank, and we had our 2 armored bulldozers in front that belonged to the 6th Field Engineer Regiment with the sappers with them. And we had 2 sections of mortars, which means that each section had 2 carriers with a trailer behind one of them, and to carry extra ammo and extra rations. The rations were supposed to be good for 2 weeks, just in case we didn't get anything. We had compo boxes and bread. Bread's supposed to last for 21 days. I asked the service corps guy how come it was could last 21 days. He said it's got formaldehyde in it. So whether they meant it, so that means that if something happened to us, at least we were partly embalmed, eh?
And then break at dawn. It was just break at dawn when we seen this landmark. We knew it was France right away.
And when we arrived off the coast, it was still a lot of clouds, not raining anymore, somewhat a little broken up, but still a lot of wind. And but the wind had died down a fair bit, but it was still very choppy.
Meanwhile, members of the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion were still trying to reach the rendezvous zone.
And we pushed it for another 2 or 3 hours, and that's when we met up with a column of troops who turned out to be a 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion column, who were heading for what we called the brickworks, or the crossroads, or what Mesnil, as we called it in those days.
Everybody was to but head for La Manille to the high ground and form our defense line. Now the men staggered in there for weeks. They were still coming in. We know that some men, individuals, were, if they were caught by any Nazi troops, they were shot. If they were caught by regular army, they could surrender if they were trapped.
We were ready to be airborne at about 5:30. So we were airborne at dawn that morning. Below, the waves were intense on the water, but the whole sector, all the way across from Portsmouth and Southampton, those are with current, with ships, boats, vehicles of any kind on the water.
By that time, we had consolidated around our rendezvous point, which was for us at this brickworks near this sort of village of Le Mesnil.
And there weren't too many of the Germans in that particular area at that time. We weren't there very long before we were digging. We were in a holding situation. We were to protect that flank so that the Germans couldn't get reinforcements down to the beachhead.
Many of the men traveled across the channel in larger ships and began loading onto the landing craft just off the shore of Normandy.
From that big ship, we got down into the little one, then we went in.
Climbing down the scramble nets on the side of the ship and into the salt craft. Of course, the salt craft were lowered before we got down there, fortunately.
And the whole ship would have these scrambling nets, and I almost fell in because the waves were coming up, and I went to step in, and the boat was down. So I was lucky I was hanging on.
Am I going to get on this thing without falling in the water? But after it was all over, that wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Then it took quite a long time for all those ships, landing craft, that to get out and get in a row.
For some unknown reason, likely we were ahead of schedule, they pulled us around in a great big circle, and when we did come in, daylight was pretty well on.
As the invasion forces approached, the bombing of the coastal emplacements by the Navy began.
The battleships that were out further were firing inland, and the shelling that was going on overhead was tremendous.
And as we moved slowly in towards the beach, HMS Rodney, which was one of the Royal Navy battleships, was behind us, And at about 6 o'clock, they started pushing in their heavy armament.
I remember that these shells were going over and they sounded like freight trains.
They really sound like a lot of rush, you know.
But when those big naval guns let blast, wow.
And of course, we didn't pay that much attention to what was going on behind us because the main thing was me. I had to survive.
It was, I guess to say the least, very, very, very noisy.
In fact, they gave us little bags, like Simpsons Eaton's bags, and that was to bring your breakfast up, which a lot of them did. In fact, on our way in, one man went little bonkers and tried to get over the side, and we had to grab him and pull him back in again. Well, he didn't have time to think. You're frightened.
Well, first, would give us a mug of rum. That made go get him guy. And then after we got on the landing craft, just before we got on the landing craft, our commanding officer said, well, you must remember, you guys are fighters, and you go out there and get them. But I don't think none of you guys will be coming home. We told them we were all coming home. We go in there and we'll kick butts.
And at the same time, the Air Force were flying over us, and I've never since seen so many planes at one time.
The continuous bombing meant around-the-clock arrivals and departures of bombers in England.
Once we landed, of course, we taxied in, shut down, and then we went into debriefing. The intelligence people debriefed us with all the questions that they had to ask and to determine just how successful the trip had been and all this type of thing. And then we went to bed.
If I recall correctly, we took out some gun placements, and there were several houses and other buildings that were our particular target. And so we were bombarding from 7 to about 7:45, because H hour, which is when the troops were to hit the beach, we had to be stopped bombarding before that.
The invasion was to receive complete aerial support from Fighter Command.
I probably took off about 7:30 to be sure to be there by 8. I was on the first show. We would get out over there at 8 o'clock, and we patrolled Juno Beach, Juno and Sword.
Well, as we got off and onto our light landing craft, we circled and circled, and finally we started to come in, and I think the Germans were more surprised, and they couldn't believe what was going on.
From what they told us, it was one of the roughest days they'd had on the English Channel in something like 60 to 65 years.
The ramp on the craft was so high, I guess it'd be about 8 foot high. We couldn't look over that, and so we just had to wait and wonder what was going to happen.
The Germans were firing at you, and the shells were coming at you, and I stood up in the middle row, and they were asking me what I saw. And I said, oh, the shoreline is only about 1/8 of an inch high. So as we kept coming in, and all the time, getting bigger, it's bigger and bigger. And finally I heard this whang coming over top of my head, crack, 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 crack. And then I got down. I couldn't get down any further because of this guy's back in front of me. And my pouches were sitting on top of his.
That's when they're coming over your head, it's a snapping sound, you know. You know that keep your head down or it's going to snap into you. The one that you don't hear is the one that gets you. While they were opening up, the big LCTs were loaded with these rockets, and they had we were told about 3,000 rockets on each one of these LCTs. I remember seeing this tank that was sinking. It had this helium apparatus around to keep it floating. That's a Sherman tank. But they were climbing out of it because it was leaking and they were trying to get everybody out. And we got closer. The front end of our landing craft was hit by an HE shell that came through where the sailor was in the compartment to lower the ramp of the LCT. And he came out and he was all bloodied, and people said get down because we could hear all this crack, 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 which is the small arms fire going over your head.
The Royal Winnipeg Rifles were the first to land on Mike Sector. under fire from the largest concentration of pillboxes along the beaches.
After we got on there, and then when we hit the beach, and then that's where really the trouble started.
We knew there were these pillboxes, there's 5 of them, and we even picked out the spot where we're going to set up our mortars on the beach.
And then they were way up on the hill as you went in. They were on the hill started, and they fired down from there.
We had a good idea of what we're up against, but they kept saying, well, it's second-rate troops, it's people who had ulcers and something wrong with flat feet. But you put anybody, regardless of what condition, in behind a trigger, they can pull it.
Landing craft was something, the tide was ahead of us. And when the landing craft came, it circled and dropped his, then you had to get off.
And then the hollering of the commander of the boat, everybody get off the boat, start getting off.
When they opened to get on, well, that means go, don't stand. Or else if you stood right there, the machine guns are going to be at you.
When that carrier went in, it was built to go 4 feet. It just sank right in, and it pulled the trailer off with it. The next one in was ours, the same bloody thing. We just went in the water and we just sank right down.
When that jumped out, that was in the water up to here, and you have to hold your rifle up so you wouldn't get it. But my rifle was no good anyway when I hit the beach. That was the biggest problem. How can you fight no rifle and all these machine guns and these pellet boxes, these cement? So we had to use our grenades.
I must have gotten right in the path of the LCAs come in, because one of them sort of brushed my shoulder and I sort of went underwater, and I said, screw it. So then I struck out, but when I finally got touching my feet, the landing crafts that had passed, the fellows that got out, there's people who were in the water. Some were face down. So you running towards the beach, just grab a couple. Bob Hussey, he grabbed a couple, pulled them in. He was doing the same as I.
If you stayed still, you were a target.
A lot of things happened. A lot of people died in that time.
Well, we figured once we got in the land, it was much better than in the water, eh? Because you know yourself when you come on the beach, what have you got to cover?
All the time we're thinking, well, at least I was thinking, I've got nothing. What are we going to do? Where's our mortars? We got nothing to support anybody.
If we could get in them, here we get one guy jump up on you. There's 2 guys jump, and then one on top getting on, then one trying to throw the grenade and make sure it falls inside. That's how we have to get the guns out.
By sniper fire and Gunson, they kept picking away at him and wounded him a second time. And that must have been pretty rough on him, because his brother was in the same boat. He was killed right on the beach, right with him.
So it didn't matter how many we lost. We still had to go.
This was the hour that all of the first wave landings would occur, and when the most men would die. The resistance was severe, and the casualties were in the same ratio as those on Omaha Beach.
We were in about 1,500 yards ashore. We could see a fair amount, and you could see them hitting the beach and the ramps going down and plowing their way up on the beach.
You could see some of the tanks coming. They had tanks that would float, and they were coming ashore.
And then when we got over there to patrol, we were patrolling the beach. Looked down, we could see the guys coming out of these landing craft. The big door go down, and they come out of the water about up to here, and they had their rifles up, keep them dry.
We came back up to the beach, and we went up and down the British, Canadian, and British beaches at 500 feet, just as the first landing craft were coming in. So we watched them come in, and we could see out to the horizon. There was black smoke on the horizon from the battleships out there firing.
But it was just unimaginable, the organization that they put together for that, because everything had to be right on time.
It was just as the first landing craft were coming in. We saw some get out and charge up the beach. There were enormous explosions, of course.
We could see people heading for a certain point. We could see it so well defended that they were going to run into a machine gun nest or something like that. We couldn't do a damn thing about it.
Each hour is when the assault the assault infantry were coming in, or guys from our rifle companies. And then you had another group, and you had tanks, and self-propelled artillery. They were just coming onto the beach. As we got in, I ran towards this one chap, and I laid down on Corporal Scaife. But it turned out he was dead. But since I had no weapon, I just grabbed this den gun, and I grabbed this small pack. So I made my way to the pillbox on the right. And we got there, and we turned around, and you see the guys were still stuck out in the water. So instinctively, we just grabbed, like I say, we just grabbed people that were still floating in the water and pulled them as far as we could. Bob and I, we got Corporal Martin. He was moaning in there. We got him up to the pillbox and got him out of under cover. Corporal Martin, who was there, he said, "But hold me, I'm cold." So I was holding him for a while, and but he was badly raked with machine gun fire right across his midriff. And of course, that meant that his lungs were going, and you had the bubbles from his mouth, you know, from the blood. And he passed away in a matter of about a minute. So, and I found out later he had a young kid that he never saw, a young boy in England that I don't think he had ever seen. The whole area, roughly 130 casualties we had along the beach. You waited so long to die so fast, you know. You think about it, you lose a lot of all your people who trained for all that time. A lot of them had gone in just that short time, and then you look around, where's all your buddies, eh? All the people you know. And the brigade headquarters come in, and there's a sergeant major there. They needed a runner, so I was designated as a runner for about a half a day. And Bull Kloss, we had a chap that he got mortally wounded, but he went in and they found him in the pillbox with his hands around a German soldier's neck. He died that way, and so did the soldiers. But we didn't go through the town itself. We just sort of went past it, you know. The Regina Rifles, they were in the town, and we were sort of on the outskirts.
I landed here on D-Day with a lot of comrades who never made it.
We didn't have much room, but what people don't understand, how few people were there. In the initial landing, there'd be 270 Queen's Own, 270 North Shore, 270 Regina Rifles, 270 Winnipeg Rifles. How many is that? A little over 1,000 men. If there had been major opposition, they would have overrun us because we were spread thin.
I was on one of the first three craft to land D-Day on Major Charlie Dalton's craft, and he was our commanding officer D-Day.
A Company landed pretty well in front of the famous half-timbered building that some people call a hotel, but was actually a residence. B Company, my platoon, landed pretty well dead smack in front of a manned pillbox.
Now, what happened to the others, I have no idea, because I was only concerned in myself and my men and so forth.
Each individual's got a very local war, 50, 60 feet by either side of them, and it's different. Maybe in front, maybe behind, but not on either side.
And then we started hit the shore, and then we down the doors, and then we started jumping off.
Our landing craft that got in fairly close, we were up to our waist in water. I've always said it would blow my crotch. I was hit in the water and knocked off my feet, but most of the guys never got ashore.
So I'd take a big run and jumped in the water. And it was fairly deep, not over my head or anything, but I ducked right down, being in the water with just your head showing. And from 200 or 300 yards from the shore, you couldn't even see the person because of the waves coming up and that.
The tide was out, so but the tide, they let the ramp down. We're in pretty deep water. We had a long distance to come in, so we were exposed to enemy fire for quite a while.
I'm short, and I was carrying the run gun, and I had to run, and I must have did pretty good because no bullet got me.
And looking at all the boys that were being killed because the Germans were up along this wall and they were just killing everybody coming in.
You weren't allowed to stop and help anybody. There was still shells exploding all over the place, mortar bombs.
I can tell you what bullets going through your clothes feels like. If I'd have been half a step further ahead, I wouldn't be here. See, I was hitting my hand and knocked off my feet. And when I come up, I had no section. Again, you could see the bodies, see the blood, but no section. Normandy was a meat grinder.
When that ramp hit the sandy beach, there was Major Charlie Dalton standing there with blood streaming down his face. He had been hit in the head. And he said, "Get up to the wall." Well, I was at the wall before he finished the sentence.
With all the bombardment, it would appear that the Germans weren't stopped by the bombardment.
Then the bunkers started firing at us. And when we hit here, our aim was right away to hit the wall and then go again. But a lot of good men didn't go. And the beaches out there were red with blood, dying comrades.
Took about 10 steps and I was wounded myself a bad wound to the right shoulder. And after I was hit, the Sergeant Major, the one I told you about, I got permission from, he came over and took my gear off and dropped it in the ocean. And we found out later he did the right thing because apparently my collarbone was just left with a splinter, and had that broken off, it would have punctured my lung likely, and I probably would have drowned in my own blood. So the thing is that I say by the grace of God I'm here.
We had a lot of equipment that didn't get ashore. No Bren guns in our section, in our boat, got ashore. Anybody that was carrying anything but a rifle didn't make it.
I'll tell you, any man says he wasn't scared, I'll show you a liar.
What can you do against a wall, pillbox, MG-42? They're belt fed, they just keep on going.
And those rifles were terrible. Single shots, bang, bang. Instead of like the Americans, you cock it once and bang, 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 bang. And these are the few things that I sort of hold against our country for not being smart enough to realize that, because every time the guy would fire, he'd have to cock it again, you see. Well, it doesn't give you much of a chance.
Of the 10 men in the section, 7 of them were killed, 2 were wounded, and the only man that survived had never done a landing, practice landing before.
My friend got to here, and next thing he says, "I'm hit." And I never saw him again till last year.
One of our other fellows in B Company there, his name was Stumpy Gordon.
Was carrying a flamethrower, portable.
The story is that when they hit the shore, they were pinned down by a machine gun, and he was going to be the big hero, so he gets up and he runs and zigzags right up to the bunker and puts the nozzle inside and pulls the trigger, and all there was a stream of liquid come out.
He landed in deep water. Flamethrower didn't work.
So he had to just lay down, and his buddy Rudy LaBeouf threw a grenade in through the hole and silenced the gun.
We had men that did outstanding things. Actually charged bunkers. You know what I mean? Men with lots of, shall I say, guts.
The whole company was pretty badly decimated. We had over half the battalion's casualties.
I believe B Company I think it was 63 we lost. So we had a bad day that day.
One of the lads, believe it or not, was killed. About 3 weeks before we landed, got a Dear John letter. Now, that lady, if you can call her such, would get his widow's allowance. That's something that sticks in your craw.
A lot of bad memories here. A lot of bad memories.
That's the one I had on D-Day. And as I say, we had 15 minutes to live. And I looked at my watch and I scraped the sand and everything off it. 20 minutes and I'm still alive. So I've kept it ever since. We got up to the wall. That was the main thing.
The wall is slowly being filled up now, 8 to 10 feet above and a concave away from you. Most of our ladders were back in the water.
We got up to the wall, and there was one of the riflemen from B Company. I think his name was George Grout. He had one of his phosphorus grenades hit by a bullet, and he was the phosphorus was burning him. So just as we passed him, 2 men were dragging him down to the water to submerge him, to put the fire out and that.
There was reinforcing rods sticking up, and one was bent over. But I took my toggle rope off, jumped up about that high on this wall, and hooked it onto one of these. And I thought, well, I'll hook it on there, and I'll get over the top of the wall. And when I did, I just heard whoosh, the bullets flying over my head, and I fell right back down. And I left my toggle rope up there. I didn't need it anymore. Somebody hollered, there's a hole. I kept creeping up there, and all the time, the enemy were trying to get at me because I was still alive.
We got through the wall. It was a hole, possibly 4 feet wide, 5 feet high.
So I got through the hole on the other side, and when I did and stood up, the ground was as tall as I was. And I took a sod and put it over my head.
Once we got past the wall, it was sporadic sniping. The half-timbered house has got a sign on it, the Queen's Own liberated it, the first building in Normandy to be liberated. If there was fighting in the Brenay, I don't think so. There was no major damage.
If it hadn't been for the hole in the wall, we'd have had trouble. That's when I saw my first flail. Now, a flail is a tank with a big drum on the front with chains. And these chains, and these drums go, this drum goes around the chains, and it beats the ground for mines. So we got in behind these, and as it moved in, beating the ground, because we knew there, and it would pick up a mine and explode in the air. Part of the chain would go with it. And we followed it all the way through. At the same time, there were 2 white tapes being put out. And as long as we stayed in those tapes, we were fine.
I remember seeing the guys after we crossed the wall, some of them, from other platoons. In fact, a friend of mine came over to me, whacked me on the shoulder and said, "You made it, Rolf." He says, "You've been hit," because he hit me on my right shoulder. I'd taken a piece of shrapnel and didn't realize it. Frank came up to me and said, "Rolf, go down and see if you can pick up a couple of Brens and some Bren mags." And so I did. I went back. They pretty sad looking beach to see people you knew, knowing that they weren't ever going to fight again.
They were men, although some of them were only kids yet.
Many of them had said it was one of our worst days.
We had a first-class seat, just could watch everything going on. And unfortunately, I saw a friend get killed. He was with 421 Squadron. Johnny Drope is his name. And he got plastered with flak from the ground. I just happened to be looking in his direction. I didn't know who was who. There was so damn many airplanes there. And I saw him climb over the side and jump, and his parachute never opened. Johnny went all the way down and hit the channel, and of course he was killed.
Right behind the, what you call them, behind the Winnipeg Rifles, actually. They were the first wave to go in, I guess, the Winnipegs, the Canadian Scottish, and the Regina Rifles.
A little scary, I guess, because there were shells flying around, and guys were running hither and yon. There was noise, and they were bringing people back because we weren't the actual first wave.
When our LCT craft landed, we hit a mine, went up through the ramp on our boat, and we couldn't get our vehicles off. All our walking people get off that time. And then we had a big tank that was on right next to us. He went over and rolled it down enough so we could get the rest of our, so we got all our vehicles off.
We fired 200 rounds per gun over Saskatchewan infantry to protect them, so the Germans would go hiding in their serpents.
there was only one pillbox where we landed. And the first thing, we saw this white flag coming up where they surrendered.
Everything moved pretty quickly. The beach was crowded with people.
So when I was over the beaches watching the landing craft come in, the first landing craft, I looked at my petrol gauge, my gas gauge, and it said 0. I had been so transfixed by what I was seeing, I hadn't watched my gauge. So we hightailed it back to England, and I made it. My airplane shut down as I was landing at a place called Thorney Island, right on the south coast. So it was an exciting day.
Another wing would be coming in to relieve us, and I'm going, boy, what a job. Glad I wasn't down there.
Despite the initial bloodbath, the Canadian troops overcame the gun emplacements and began to move beyond the dreaded Atlantic Wall.
Well, we landed with the infantry almost. As soon as we finished firing these guns over their heads, we came behind and landed them. It was my birthday, June the 6th, when I came in. I never thought of my birthday that particular day. I was thinking ahead all the time with the enemy.
I think we ran across the railway track and there was a bunch of stores in through there.
No resistance for us. When we started going through the town, the residents would come out with bottles of wine and cognac and Calvados, wanting us to stop to have a drink. There's no way we could do that, of course.
And there was sniper fire from further in. We don't know where it's from, and they feel that someone's coming from the tower. There's a tower, like a church tower. They feel it was coming there. And
well, we always had a tank with us, and the tank would just fire up in there and knock the church. So we had to start knocking all the church spires down because that's where they were hiding, and they were tipping everybody off as to what we were doing down below, you see.
Well, I heard this one coming and somebody yelled duck, and before he got the duck out, I was down because I was, hey, this guy ain't gonna get me.
Anyways, we reached the south end of the town, and we had our instructions that we were to go into the orchard on the left-hand side. Then our carrier arrived, and we set up the mortar, and we started firing on the 88 also. Now, while I was throwing bombs down the barrel, and all of a sudden the biggest explosion I had ever heard happened because the 88 had a direct hit on one of the SPs of the 14th Field Regiment. The gun came flying over, and I heard this screaming noise, and I looked around and just caught the corner of my eye. I flattened out, and that gun that must have weighed about a ton came flying past and just tipped the end of my mortar enough to knock it out of alignment. And I always figured that gun had my name on it, because I went right from D-Day to VE Day without being wounded.
As the men moved inland, the casualties were being taken back to the ships.
We had one landing craft with Royal Marines come alongside. They'd been hit by a shell, and so we boarded, I think it was 6 wounded. From that, I think it was 2 or 3 succumbed during the night. And so the next day we had a typical naval burial at sea.
The heavy bombers in Bomber Command, of course, were constantly attacking targets as the troops moved forward.
Well, and we just kept going round and round the circle, waiting for our turn. And I think that was part of the hardest part, was waiting.
The beaches were congested due to limited exits, and the second wave was held back.
We had 3 landing craft, 1 company on each of the 3, and the other company, the platoons were split up. one platoon on each of the 3 boats. Well, it was about 3 hours after the initial landing that we were directed in, and we landed behind the Queen's Own, and that was what they call Nan White Sector Beach on Juno, and by that time there was an awful lot of congestion on the beach.
As soon as we hit shore, then they all come up and got their bicycles and went down the ramp with them.
If they slipped, you know, they went under, and the naval types, they had a line out to the shore, and they were holding the line offshore so you could hold on to the rope to guide yourself in and help yourself.
There was a lot of injured laying there, but we had a path to go along and get to this church. That's what they told us to do, and get ready to keep on going. And there was a lot of Germans they had captured.
Well, the major obstacle was getting off the beach, because there's only one opening in the seawall near our area that we could get off. In the meantime, the Queen's Own and the Chaudières had worked inland a little bit, and were clearing snipers and whatnot that were left.
The group that was ahead of us, they were in quite a long ways. That when we got on our bicycles, we were really clipping it off with the bicycles.
I remember once I had to, we were marching up a road, and I had to have a ball movement. And I thought, well, and they're all going up the road single file, and I'm not going to be left out here because a sniper would pick me off. So I had to run away up to the front as far as I could, then get my pants down, do my business, and get back in line again. It was always a frightening situation, always.
I said, I'm okay. I ran a couple more errands, and he said, okay, you can go back. So I went back, and I became an extra man with the other mortar crews.
At 11 o'clock on that particular morning, the regiment de Chaudière were hung up trying to get into Benny-sur-Mer, which was about 5 miles inland. They were held up by 3 German 88 millimeters, and we were called upon to take them out, and we put 1 salvo over and 1 salvo under, and then the next 13 took them out.
For the members of the RCAF, their time between missions were spent anxiously following the progress of the invasion.
As the morning progressed, you'd hear vision over the radio, you know, I mean, the broadcasting stations.
The BBC is pretty good, and for the purpose of the war tales and this type of thing, war reporting, they were excellent.
The BBC was exceptionally good and very well informed. So you got probably as good reports coming out to the general public as we could get from our intelligence.
Near the front.
Then we sent some couple of men back, 2 or 3 men from our company to bury the Germans. They took a hell of a beating.
The Paras held the line along the flank.
Well, later in the morning, the Germans had time to regroup and know where we were, so they fired heavily with mortars to begin with, then a bit of artillery, and then we had some probing attacks, I would call them, to find out our strength.
As we were going down this narrow pathway, one of our riflemen had been killed, and he was sitting with his back to the bank, and his feet were out into the pathway, and there was only room enough for a vehicle to get through, and the tanks just rolled over his legs, and our carrier had to do the same thing. I thought, boy, oh boy, that fellow's really into the soil of Normandy. We never had time to really evaluate things and get scared or anything. We were scared, but it didn't stop us from our job.
As the morning turned into afternoon, all Canadian units were pushing forward and moving well.
Our brigade moved off in one line with the North Nova Scotia Highlanders leading, and the Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry Highlanders next, and we were in the rear.
We kept moving south, north, south, I guess that's what's saying here.
They came out and they cheered us, they hugged us, they brought out whatever they had in the way of food. They wanted to give us something, whether it was cider or something else to drink and so on. Oh, they were so grateful that we'd finally come.
The first people that we saw from the beach, at least that I saw, one of a British commando unit had, I think it was led by Lord Lovett. They had landed in the British section, and they had bicycles, and they had their objective was to race ahead and join up with us.
It got to a point where they didn't want to fight. They were prepared to give up.
One determining factor on D-Day was the Allies' superiority over the Luftwaffe in the air.
Didn't see any German planes at the beginning. Later in the afternoon, one was foolish enough to come over, and they came down in pieces. They just blew it apart in the air.
They'd been, shall we say, disadvantaged.
It wasn't quite as strong as it was in the early part of the war.
Fighter command could keep Luftwaffe back, which they did, and they did a great job at it.
Of course, the Typhoons, which gave close support to the ground forces as they moved up through France, were tremendously important.
But for close support for infantry, tank busters, it's hard to beat the little Tippy.
Generally, we controlled the air, which made a difference.
Continuous air support was flown over the beaches all day.
It was about 3 o'clock, and it was quite a different sortie from the viewpoint of what we were able to see on the ground, because by this time our troops were well inland, particularly the Canadian troops who really had moved very well. They were really moving in, and the landing craft were continuing to come in at great volume all the way along, which indicated that a good foothold had been made.
The Canadian forces advanced rapidly on D-Day, quickly overcoming opposition.
You really had to be on your toes, and everybody looking for the Germans. And a lot of our anti-tank guns, the field guns, would help us out.
I went again at 4 o'clock. For example, at one point I recall a hedgerow, and we could see German troops bend over going along the hedgerow, and Canadians were going down here, or Allies were going down this way. They were going to meet at the corner. The temptation was to go down and blast the Germans. But we had one job only, was to patrol the beach and keep enemy aircraft out. And just while we were watching, about half a dozen Typhoons come in. I think they were firing rockets, and they went in and they blasted the hell out of that hedge. And people.
One of the things that we saw as we came back to England that afternoon were these great caissons, huge concrete blocks, huge, enormous things being towed out of port across to the beach.
Later on, they towed these barges over to tie them together. They called it Mulberry Harbor.
And in order to supply an army and to keep supplying it with men and equipment and supplies, oil, gas, whatever you need, you had to have a port. When we landed and got back the second time, that was the end of the day for me in terms of flying operations.
It must have been about 5 o'clock in the afternoon when we finally got there. This was at the crossroads called Lemonnill. My first job, when I arrived, I thought I was to dig in. They said, just go find the Germans. I went on the field side of that hedge, got about halfway along, and there was one of our fellows, a sniper, laying with his sniper's rifle aimed at the bush across the field. Anyway, when I went up, said something, nothing happened. When I went to step over him, I was surprised that he didn't move, so I stopped and shook him, and then he had a bullet right through his forehead, and eventually came to a fairly thick hedge that was at the side of a fairly gravelly road. And I was going to cross it, and then, but looking through that hedge, there was a farmhouse, about 300 feet away from the road, and there was a lot of Germans milling around it. So I said, well, that's where the Germans are. I headed back, reported in, and to the captain who had taken over the company, Captain Hansen. I was digging in a little bit later when we heard this whistling sound. That's the first time I'd ever heard it, but it turned out these be these big Navy shells. And on a patrol, so, a day later, 2 days later, we passed that place, and there was hardly anything left of that house.
While the forces on the ground continued advancing, the pilots returning to England reported on their progress.
Another debriefing, and at that time we told what we had observed and all we could verify having seen without speculating on what was happening. One thing, of course, we'd go into the bar and have a drink, and have a bitter, I guess they called it, beer.
As the day wound down, there were more clashes with German units setting up the front.
The Germans put in an attack from the field that I'd gone across. They were firing at us from the hedge, the far end of the field. Everybody in our group, all of a sudden, started opening up on them. And now they knew where we were, and that's all they wanted to know. From then on, we got shelled and mortared every damn day.
We ate compo packed, as we called it, and wasn't the best, but it was food. We were hungry.
It was pretty tense that night. We got as far as Benny-sur-Mer, but we were around a chateau, and so on. We had to dig in and expect a counterattack, maybe anytime.
The Canadian advance was highly successful, but it had to be halted.
Unfortunately, see, the British on our left got stalled, and the British on our right got stalled. And what happened is our brigade got in, kept going up there in a straight line, and just like a finger, and there was nothing in support on either side.
In one spot before Villers-les-Buissons there, they showed some of the Canadian tanks got that far. Then the 88s just clobbered them.
The North Nova's got the furthest inland because they got down past Buron into Othie.
Gradually, all of the Canadian units had to stop and dig in for the night.
The next experience, we advanced straight up to Capricaire Airport, and then we had to pull back because the bunkers were in the Capricaire.
That's the time we went as far as this airport, and about 20 miles in, and they called us back from there. Yeah? They were scared there'd be sort of ammunition.
Until we got up to a place called Villers-les-Buissons, and that was only about 3 miles from Buron. And then we just packed all the bicycles up.
We didn't meet the enemy head on. I don't know where the hell they were. But we dug in quickly to get down.
We finally reached the towns of Angerny and Annecy. Now, the Queen's Own went farther inland than any other regiment, and they took and held the objective.
There were times in the dark when you're exhausted. That tendency was to fall asleep. We had two men per slit. So you had to make sure at least one was awake. We were dead tired. And we were sick too. And of course we hadn't hadn't slept coming across, and most of us hadn't eaten anything or could hold anything down. And most of us acquired headaches and so on.
We got through there, and then we settled down for that night. Then food came up to us at nighttime, and we ate what we could.
It was a very edgy time. Everybody was living on their nerves, I think.
We continued to sweep, and then our duty, once darkness came, was to go outside the landing area and patrol for, do anti-submarine patrol.
I had the runs badly. And in the town, there was a bakery. And they had these little hedges all around their properties. So I crept along the hedges all the way through into the bakery. Because I was eating green apples, hungry. And of course, too many green apples, you know what happened. So that's what cured me, was the fresh bread.
We probably laid down and had a sleep for a little while, and then up again.
It was a pretty hair-raising situation all the time, especially at nighttime, because you didn't know what was happening. And then alongside of us, they used to fire tracer bullets. And that was for the airplanes, our planes up above. And these planes were drone overhead. And these bullets, they waved the guns up like this, and these tracers would go like this, and be a laneway for their planes to drop their bombs down at nighttime.
Well, I don't remember feeling hungry or tired until I started to dig in late at night. That's when it started to hit me.
We fought all night. We had to get the railroad track. We had to try and blow the railroad track so they wouldn't come in with more. The thing was not to let the Germans know that we lost. We lost that many casualties that we had here. We had to keep going, pretend that we were still in full force.
But that was a pretty frightening sensation to go through that first barrage. And then after it stopped, I stuck our head up, expecting an attack, which didn't take place, and yelled to the other guys in the other slit trains, "Everybody okay?" And the word went down the line, "Okay."
Like when we went down, so we dug in a few places the first night, and we captured a bunch of Germans ourselves. The patrol coming at night. We never moved till they got right on top of us. And we just put the flares, and there they were. And we all jumped up with our rifle, and they just dropped everything, got their hands up. We kicked some butts back and bring them back.
In France in those days, you could see the trees across a field in the dark, and just an outline of them. And I don't know how many times you could swear you could see troops coming at you in the dark. It took me almost 10 years to learn to sleep with my eyes closed.
When you've been at action stations for 18 hours or better, you start to get a little loggy at the end of that time.
We woke up in the middle of the night, well, it was the wee hours of the year, and all I could see was tracers going through the air, and we thought about fellows digging holes then in a hurry, get underground.
As the day was ending for the ground troops, Bomber Command was taking off for another series of bomb runs.
We took off at 23:06, so it would be an hour before midnight. We were out again on another operation to do with D-Day. You occupy the land, but once you've occupied it, there's people trying to shove you back off again. So you have to, there's follow-up operations.
I was walking wounded because I was only hit in the hand. I was sent to the MO somewhere around midnight as the company was moving into their area where they were to dig in, up between Angerley and Annecy, what we called Hill 80.
And the day ended with shells going over, and still a lot of noise, and I know I didn't get any sleep. if you want to call it, there was no day end. It was just a continuous 24 hours of go, go, go.
As D-Day drew to a close, Operation Overlord was deemed a success. The Allies had achieved surprise in the attack and had captured a foothold in Europe. It was the beginning of the end of World War II. The Canadians landing on Juno Beach faced harsh resistance, second only to that of Omaha Beach. Yet the Canadians prevailed and advanced farther inland than the British and Americans. It was a magnificent military achievement that evokes great national pride. Yet it was a victory that came with a high price. On D-Day, 340 Canadians died, 574 were wounded, and 47 were taken prisoner. Theirs was a sacrifice in a just cause. No conflict was more pivotal to win, no evil greater to defeat. Anything less than victory would have been disastrous for the world. For those brave Canadians who were there, who determined the course of history, they deserve a nation's gratitude.
I'm quite proud of the fact that we did a job, and, the best of our ability.
Well, I feel honored to have been there in a small way, participating in it.
Right now, I'm very glad that I was there. Now, I'm also pleased that I'm still here.
But it was an experience that I'm glad I went through it, and I'm glad I survived.
Oh yes, very, very proud.
I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
I think we should be proud to be Canadians, and for my part, for to be especially a Métis veteran, I wanted to prove myself that I could be just as good a soldier. I don't care who he is or what he is or what color he was.
Well, I think I'm lucky to have taken part, and I'm lucky to have come through it.
Fantastic. And I think the Canadian Army proved they were one of the best in the world.
But to see so many people that didn't do it, that's a traumatic thing to see.
I wasn't really scared till much later.
I spent almost my whole life having survived all that and hardly give it a thought. I was damn lucky.
I guess it meant it was the turning point, and it showed that the end was near.
D-Day in the history of Canada must be one of the really significant events. A lot of attention is now being paid to D-Day 60 years after the event, probably more than has been in the past.
We had to get those people that were considering going to take over the world, like the Germans did with Hitler. And that's why I feel that it was an important engagement.
We felt we were doing the right thing, and of course we were. But what proved it, when we were going through Germany, just outside of Hamburg, is one of the concentration camps called Belsen-Bergen, or Bergen-Belsen. I never know which way to say it, but it was a concentration camp, and they had killed many Jews. And as our brigadier said, if you want to know what we're fighting for, that's a good place to see it.
We got rid of Hitler. Someone had to do it.
Did we save the world? Well, darn near it.
And that's who we feel sorry for, is the many men and women that didn't make it home and lost 3/4 of their life.
I think it means a lot to Canadians because so many people were involved.
I'm not so sure that the average person really realizes how much that our generation, and of course the generation preceding us, did for Canada in these two dreadful wars.
I'm pleased and I'm thankful that I survived, and now I think more of all the guys who didn't. What would they have done with their lives if they'd have survived?
We go to the cemetery at Benny somewhere in the far left corner. all my friends are. I figure in that cemetery, I have no 80 people by first name.
When you go over there and see the cemeteries, you gotta drop a few tears, I'll tell you that.
We lost the most men. I get too emotional.
D-Day is something that our country ought to remember. That these people that are lying here, these are the guys that did it. We came through it, but these are the people that have to be honored. It's our duty to honor them. They gave them everything.
On June the 6th, 2003, the Juno Beach Center was officially open. Located right on Juno Beach, a few hundred feet from where the Royal Winnipeg Rifles landed, it stands as a monument to all Canadian World War II veterans. The permanent displays depict Canada in the 1930s. Canada goes to war, the roads to victory, and a memorial to those Canadians who made the ultimate sacrifice. In some came back, others did not. The tour ends with an exhibit of the faces of Canada today, depicting Canada's diversity and achievements, which is the lasting legacy of the freedom that Canada's soldiers fought for. The Juno Beach Center educates on Canada's role in World War II and perpetuates the memory of those soldiers for generations to come. The site is now an attraction that brings Canada to the world and remembers how one small nation took a large role in determining the destiny of the 20th century.
Finally, veterans from World War II are being recognized, and now they have a place, a memorial education center, where their story is being told.
I think it's a good idea. It's like a monument. We were there. We did a hell of a good job. And we lost a lot of good men.
Well, I understand that the memorial itself is not strictly for D-Day, but it serves as a good focal point. But my understanding is it's for all people who participated in World War II.
We'll now be able to tell exactly what Canada did, how much it contributed, considering 11 million people produced 1,100,000 in uniform. No other country did that. The fourth largest contributor to victory in World War II. It's amazing, and people have no idea of the magnitude of that. Canada's going to become better known because of it.
One of the big problems is that our Canadian schools are not teaching sufficient Canadian history or the involvement of Canadians in world history. Maybe the Juno Beach concept will gradually change this, and we'll get more history being taught in our schools.
It took too long to happen. And I think the organizers of it, the fact that it was the actual guys who'd been there, did that, started the ball rolling, I think it speaks words and words about their devotion to this project.
I think Garth Webb and his people did a good job, and it was very well appreciated, and I think it always will be.
It's a magnificent Canadian achievement.
Proud of being involved in the Juno Beach Center? Absolutely. I feel that I've done the best I can, and it makes me feel better about remembering all the guys we lost.
You know, if they just think for a fleeting moment of how much they owe the people that of the previous generation, of my generation, that maybe the sacrifices of so many of the people that died in Normandy and throughout the rest of the war, maybe they won't be forgotten. If you don't know your history and don't know the sacrifices that people have made before you, I think you miss a lot.
I would hope they would remember the fallen and those who were there.
Experience the whole story of D-Day with in-depth interviews and a comprehensive look at the events in the companion book to this documentary, D-Day, Canada's 24 Hours of Destiny, from Dundurn Press. Travel arrangements provided by Alarm Force.